FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and today is the 7th of August, 2018. This year is practically gone, if you can believe it. Well, voter fraud, big issue. You think that the left is getting ready to steal the next election? Do you think they tried to steal the last one? How many elections do you think are honest and are actually stolen, preordained events just to make it look like democracy is really working when it's not? We're going to discuss those issues and more. First, as always, we invite you to be part of the show. Send us an email. If it's good, I will read it on air and answer it live. And the email address is kl@kerrylutz.com. Getting back to voter fraud. So, new book out. I think it's must-reading. Author is on with us now. Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election. The author, Eric Eggers. Eric, you are research director for the Government Accountability Institute. Do I have that right?
You sure do.
Okay, just let me mark that. Eric, you are research director for the Government Accountability Institute, and you've worked with one of our favorite guests of all time, Peter Schweitzer, heavily involved in the research for Clinton cash, extortion, and secret empires. Obviously, no sacred cows in your neck of the woods. We welcome you to the Financial Survival Network.
Thanks, Kerry. It's great to be here.
So, voter fraud. I have about as much confidence in the integrity of the voter system as I do in the integrity of Congress, which I guess is another way of saying none. This is a problem. In your book, you're talking that it's Soros funded, that it's rampant all over the country, and you provide numerous examples of it. How serious is this problem?
Well, I think it's extremely serious, Kerry, and I think you're right to have suspicion as to just how honest and well-regulated and well-administrated our elections are. At the Government Accountability Institute, we started on the first of its kind national comprehensive survey because you hear a lot of talk about voter fraud these days, right? The president talks about it. People on the left try to deny it. There's always discussions and debates about whether or not voter ID should be held and whether that's racist. So a lot of discussion. So we said, all right, well, because we deal with facts, we're going to do a national study. And so we performed an analysis of actual votes cast in the 2016 election. And so for the first time ever, we gathered as many publicly available data rolls as we could get. And we looked at the ballots that were cast. And then we took those and we hired a data expert. And we utilized a proprietary commercial database that's used to detect EBT fraud and other types of identity theft. And we said, all right, well, let's see what the data shows us. And to be honest, what we found was shocking. We found 2,100 double votes in the state of Florida alone. Now, to your listeners who may not know, what a double vote means is that somebody cast a ballot in the state of Florida, 2,100 people to be exact, and then cast a second ballot a second time in a different state. So, and as you recall from the 2000 election, 2,100 is basically 4 times the number of ballots or the number of votes that swung the presidential election in 2000. So, so we're now talking about something that's significant of a scale that could impact a presidential election. The numbers actually proved to be about 8,400 double votes cast nationwide. And of course, while that seems like a lot, we really shouldn't be that shocked. The Supreme Court just recently cited data that said there's 3 million voters, nearly 3 million voters who are registered to vote in more than one state right now. And actually, of the voter registrations in the country, 1 in 8, or approximately 24 million, are highly problematic or just completely inaccurate. So we know the system is very flawed. And then it just becomes a question of, all right, are there people actively trying to exploit those vulnerabilities? And sadly, yeah, our research indicates that there are.
So, part of the double vote, the double registrations is I did it myself. I lived in New York. I moved down to Florida. I never bothered telling them in New York that I moved because I felt it was none of their business. So I'm technically still registered in 2 states, but I have no intention of voting twice. It's hard enough for me to get to the polls for 1 vote, let alone for 2. So part of that is just the inefficiency of the system and the failure of voters like myself to notify their former states, because we have millions of people that have moved out of California, moved out of New York, out of the Northeast, from the high tax blue states to the lower tax red states. So, that part, hey, I don't know how significant it is. What I find amazing, though, is that there is no check at any level in virtually any state to determine whether somebody registering to vote is an actual U.S. citizen. If we've got 10, 20, 30 million of them here, illegal aliens, there's nothing in the current system. There's no checks and balance, nothing to stop them from voting.
Well, and I'll just tell you this, Kerry, because you raised an interesting point, and both of the issues you've mentioned actually, I think, converge and combine to make this such a problem. So you're right that ultimately you didn't tell the state of New York that you moved. It's none of their business. But part of the problem with that is the state of New York also then doesn't actively seek to find if you've moved. And any time states try to take efforts to clean up their voter rolls, as Ohio has done, as Indiana has done, they're inevitably stopped by these leftist groups, right? Like the ACLU or ACORN, these groups, they file lawsuits. Mark Elias, who was the Clinton campaign attorney in 2016, was also doing work on behalf of these Soros-funded, get out the vote efforts. And so he sued the state of Ohio to prevent them, right, from doing certain things. Well, guess what happens when that occurs, right? When states are unable to clean up their voter rolls, then that's where the errors and bloat happen. Then that's where we have stuff like, I think there's 248 counties in this country that have more registered voters than legal voting residents. So there's problems all over. And so these groups, they keep the states from being able to actively clean them up. And so then the second piece of that is, so then groups like ACORN and La Raza can exploit the fact that we have so many non-citizens in this country, and they get these non-citizens and they drive them to the polls. These non-citizens are confused. They think it's okay to sell their vote. And so as we discuss in the book, non-citizens actually end up becoming the unwitting victims of the flaws in the system, because once a non-citizen registers to vote, right, or votes inappropriately on behalf of somebody else's flawed registration, then that totally undermines and eliminates their ability to ever become a legal citizen.
Correct. And a lot of them have unregistered as a result of that, because they've come to the conclusion that, hey, voting as a non-citizen, that's it. You're done. No citizenship for you. Voter fraud is as old as, as democracy, I guess. People have been swaying elections for centuries. And now we've got it within our grasp, though, using the blockchain to stop it. It can be stopped dead in its tracks if every state went to a blockchain-based voter registration system. In its infancy now, but that's where our hope lies. It's not just the Democrats doing it, though. I remember reading a book about LBJ. I think it was The Rise to Power, and he was running for Senate and basically running against a populist, and he effectively stole the election, ballot box 13, in a fringe Texas county. And what they would do is the counties where they could manipulate the votes would report in last. And they found that all of these last 50 voters for LBJ were all in the same handwriting and all done in the last half hour of voting, or maybe even after. And yet Hugo Black, who was the Supreme Court judge in charge of that district, that circuit in the country, which I think is the Fifth Circuit, said, no, we're not going to hear it. I'm not going to issue an injunction. This is a states' right matter. So effectively, states' rights fell into one of the biggest statists ever rise to power. And the question is, how do we prevent it? How can you stop it? It seems like the public doesn't really grasp the magnitude of the problem.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on what these obstacles are. But I think from my research and what we lay out in the book is that there's this sort of weird kind of negative connotation with anybody that talks about voter fraud. People associate any discussion of the breadth and severity of the issue of voter fraud as a push to create and implement mandated voter ID, which then becomes, well, mandated voter ID is clearly racist. You're just trying to suppress minority turnout. You're trying to rig elections by keeping the most vulnerable populations from being able to cast a ballot. And the reality is that's just completely false. There's no evidence to suggest that requiring a voter ID negatively impacts or suppresses minority turnout. In fact, the opposite is true. The state of Ohio saw increase in minority turnout after they passed their voter ID law. The state of Alabama recently passed the voter ID law. And in the most recent Senate election, the Roy Moore election, they had record minority turnout as well. So, there's just no evidence to support that. But I think because of the concern over the connotation, that's why you see people are sort of afraid to talk about it. I was actually just at a convention in St. Louis this past weekend with a bunch of election law attorneys. And I was speaking about the book, and I had multiple judges and prosecutors come up to me and say, yeah, listen, you're exactly right. I was presented with evidence and I saw the cases, but I didn't want to use the limited resources I had to go after something because of the public relations hit I knew I would take. So I think that also, so it's almost like it's confirmation bias, right? People think it's racist to go after it. And so then people don't go after it, and because people don't go after it, then clearly it's not a problem. And that's just, not what my research indicates.
Well, the whole concept is absurd that somehow poor people don't have access to government issued ID. If you want to get food, EBT cards, food stamps, if you want to get welfare, you want to get Section 8 housing, any government benefit program that specifically appeals to poorer members of our society, you got to cough up your ID. There's no other way to do it. If you want to go return a pair of socks to Bloomingdale's, they want to see your ID. So the idea that there's somehow this substantial portion of poorer people who've fallen off the grid and they have no government ID, it's an absurdity, and it's really a non sequitur.
Yeah, it's paternalistic, which in and of itself is maybe a little racist, because you're exactly right. The reality is, if you want to buy a beer, if you want to get on an airplane, or ironically, if you wanted to go to the Democratic National Convention in 2016, you would have had to show your ID to get in. So the idea that we shouldn't have to have some level of visual confirmation to make sure the person on whose behalf you're casting the ballot is you is just ridiculous. But that's one of the vulnerabilities that these organizations continue to fight for, and they get exploited. In New York, they did a study, the New York Department of Investigation in 2013. They'd heard reports about just the problems and the flaws with their voting system, and so they sent actually a bunch of undercover agents to try to vote on behalf of people that they knew whose names were on the rolls, but who shouldn't have been on the rolls, right? Mm-hmm. And so they didn't have ID. And so they went in, and a 26-year-old investigator was actually able to cast a ballot on behalf of a 76-year-old resident. Numerous times really? Were able to cast ballots on behalf of felons.
It's unbelievable.
And of the 63 times the undercover investigators tried to cast a ballot, they were successful 61 times. And one of the two times, this is absolutely true, and we lay out all this in the book, one of the only two times they weren't successful, the investigator was trying to cast a ballot on behalf of a convicted felon.
Yeah.
The convicted felon's mother was the poll worker, is the only reason why they weren't able to cast a ballot.
Oh, my goodness. So that's like purely fortuitous.
Right.
Hey, but, you can't make this stuff up. But the idea is that it's really a threat to democracy. If we don't do anything now, who knows what's going to happen? And it's really a RICO action. This party, led by the Soroses, really have a racketeer, influence, corrupt organization that is conspiring to steal elections. And And then you have motor voter. We didn't even talk about motor voter. We've got provisional ballots. So if you're rightfully not on there, we've got Governor Cuomo, I think it was, or Terry McAuliffe as well, pardoning felons so that they have the right to vote. And, there maybe should be a legitimate debate about giving back felons their right to vote. I think that is a legitimate debate, but it shouldn't be taking place by a mass pardon by these politicians of questionable repute.
No, I completely agree with you. And actually, I'll do you one better. I mentioned that these non-citizens who maybe don't know what the technicalities are of the law, and they end up registering to vote illegally, and which jeopardizes their ability to become citizens. Felons is the same issue. It's actually a little bit tragic. In Florida, we talk about this in the book as well. There was a woman who actually worked for an elections office, but she was a felon. She'd gotten out of prison. She'd served her time, and she was worked for this elections office. And because she worked for the elections office, she was actually actively casting ballots, voted numerous times in numerous elections. Well, she went up to the Florida Clemency Board to try to get her rights restored, but because she'd been voting illegally, her rights were denied. And this is a woman who had turned her life around. She'd given up drugs. She'd found religion, and she totally changed her life. And she just wanted to have her rights restored. But because she'd continued to commit the crime of illegal voting, the Clemency Board denied her. So I think it actually does create victims of people who just don't know any better. And so I think that's the key, right, is by not having an honest conversation about the vulnerabilities of our system, the left, unfortunately, actually victimizes the same groups they would claim to want to protect.
Yeah, that is a perfect example. Something needs to be done. Now, one thing I want to point out, I do believe that Trump is very aware of this. He said it after the election that he would have won the popular vote had there not been a massive voter fraud. And he was poo-pooed by the media, by everybody. But, the thing is, when Trump makes these seemingly outrageous statements, they have a way of coming true. Now, when Homeland Security, the Secretary of Homeland Security, recently had a press conference, I think 2 days ago, they said, we're watching out for the Russians. I mean, it sounded like every country in the world wants to manipulate our election by the way she was talking, Eric. The Russians, the Montevideans, the Albanians. I mean, who doesn't? Icelandic people, they want to manipulate our elections too. And probably the goat herders in Greenland are out to do it too. But then she said, and there are others who we know about who are seeking to influence our elections, and we're keeping a close eye on all of them. That to me said, hey, not just enemies from without, but enemies from within. They're onto them because it's a simple matter. J. Christian Adams said, was head in the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division for years and years, till Obama basically drove him out because said that during the whole Philly voting episode in the 2008 election, when there were the new Black Panther Party intimidating whites, and Obama chose to do nothing about it, he quit. He said there's a database that the U.S. maintains of everybody and I can't remember what it was called, the database, but everybody's immigration status is in there. Maybe it's from people entering and leaving the country. Not sure. He said within 15 minutes, they could run off the entire U.S. voter database against the list and know exactly who the illegal aliens registered to vote are. I think they're doing it because originally that voter commission was out there. Then the Democrats sabotaged it, so it got brought into Homeland Security. It wouldn't surprise me if they're working on the problem behind the scenes now.
No, I'm sure that they are working on it, and I think you're exactly right. I think the president is aware of the issue, and as Christian Adams has said, and I actually quote Christian Adams in the book talking about this. The good news is that the president is laser focused on this issue of voter fraud, and he is, I think, trying to educate Americans about the issue despite the denials and dismissals from appliant mainstream media. But I think, it's another key point that you raised here about the idea of Russian interference that the DHS secretary mentioned. You hear a lot of people, when I would tell people I was working on a book on voter fraud, they would say, oh, well, clearly you're going to be writing about the Russian effort to impact the election. And so, because that's the only voter fraud they've even considered might be a problem. And, and here's what's really fun about that is if you're one of those people that thinks that Russia colluded with Trump or did whatever it could to hack our elections and impact the results, or if you're somebody, I think, like yourself, who recognizes the domestic threat to the vulnerability of it, notice that inherent in both of those perspectives is this idea that our elections are just not secure. So we actually, I think, agree, despite our record political polarization, that there is a problem. And so I hope that people are able to kind of take off their political blinders and say, listen, we have a real issue. The elections are not secure, and it's time to have an honest conversation about what to do about it. And that's why in the book I lay out some solutions. I think requiring an ID, as we just discussed, is a really simple first step. I think at the state level, I think allowing states to be able to take active measurements to make sure that people like yourself who've moved, or people that have died, or people that have gone to prison, or whatever the issue is, but let's just make sure that the voter registrations are honest and accurate. And then at the federal level, there should be, whether it's using the DHS database, whatever it is, we should just have some level of verification that when you register to vote, you're actually a citizen. And I think that would actually eliminate so many problems. But unfortunately, the left continues to fight against efforts like that. And these vulnerable populations just end up as victims as a result. You mentioned blockchain, which Estonia has done. And there are countries around the world that are making significant strides in this. So we remain a bit of a third world country when it comes to our election technology.
Yeah. And we just take democracy for granted. Not understanding, just like we need to fight enemies outside the country, we need to fight enemies within the country. Hey, I could honestly talk to you about this for hours, and the corruption of the government. You've really spearheaded. I mean, obviously, Peter Schweitzer is kind of the public face of all this, but you've been right there behind him, exposing fraud. Whether it be the Clintons, I mean, there was another one, I think Schweitzer wrote, throw them all out of office, something like that. I mean...
Yeah, about insider trading in Congress, right?
Yeah, you guys have been equal opportunity muckrakers, if you will, taking a word out of the past. But that's what they used to call investigative journalists when they did exist, muckrakers, because you go into the muck and you expose it to sunlight, which is the only thing that can put an end to it. But when you've got the media corrupted the way it is now, really difficult. I say it's not just blindness on the part of the media, it's deliberately being part of this conspiracy.
Yeah, that's a reality that I think is impacting more than what American people realize, and it certainly, I think, has negatively impacted our ability to have an honest discussion about the threat of voter fraud. But we certainly appreciate your support. I know you've been very supportive of Peter's work, and I appreciate you having me on today to help educate your listeners of, just how much of a problem it is.
Hey, I just remember reading Clinton Cash, and I know those people, a bunch of those people up in Canada who were involved in the whole thing, and just my jaw dropped. I mean, I really, I think you could get from where I'm coming from. I'm not exactly naive about this stuff. I know it goes on, and I'd like to see it stop. But the level there, it brought it to a whole new level. Like Peter said, that people can set up these foundations, former leaders, and just be free to rape and pillage, and there's not anything that can be done about it. That was shocking to me. I got to say that it had gotten to that level. Like, what separates America from being a banana republic here, Eric? Really, rule of law, respect for property rights, respect for individual rights, that the individual's not subservient to the state, that the state's supposed to serve the individual. These things, and we're losing them. And I applaud your efforts, Peter's efforts, all of you guys at GAI for what you do, because, something's got to be done. Hey, website to find the book, voterfraudbook.com. Where else do we connect with you on the internet here, Eric?
Yeah, I think voterfraudbook.com, and that would be the best place. Of course, you can also, there's a link to the book there for Amazon, and then you can always find me on Twitter at Eric_Eggers.
Eggers, Eggers. Hey, we're speaking with Eric Eggers, and new book, Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election. Well, we can only hope that their aspirations will be frustrated just like they were in 2016, somewhat almost miraculously. I will take credit for being one of a handful of media people who predicted that outcome, almost down to the state with the exception of Pennsylvania. So somehow the system actually worked there because Trump is now president. Eric, wish you the best of luck on this book. We're going to have you back on after the midterm elections in 2018 in November to kind of do a little play-by-play, see what happened and were they fair and honest, because that's really the core fundamental basis for a functioning democracy or public form of government as we have here in the U.S. Thanks so much. We wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks so much for having me on.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.